So kind of your last name,
Well, you're here, so
or do you want me to just have you introduce yourself?
My last name?
Yeah.
Gansfried.
Miles Gansfried.
Yes. You can use the translation to English.
Oh.
It means peaceful goose.
Ooh, peaceful goose.
Yeah.
G-A-N-S.
So you can just say that I'm an American Indian by the name of Peaceful Goose.
Oh, okay. And Joe,
No,
your
my
last
name is Gansfried.
Niola. And you would know how to pronounce that.
Niola.
Yeah, it also means peaceful goose in Italian.
Miles Gansfried, peaceful goose.
Okay, you're rolling.
And Joe Niola.
I started you, so when
Okay.
No, don't introduce me as
All right.
peaceful goose.
Okay.
No.
Not a crazy.
Okay. Good afternoon, good morning, welcome to Progressive Soup. My name is Emily Volfentesta, and I'm here with my co-host, David Stevenson. And today we have two wonderful guests. We have Miles Gansfried and Joe Niola. Welcome to our show. And so today we're talking about Bernie Sanders and with the upcoming election coming up, and Bernie Sanders being a Democratic candidate. So we're going to be talking about him today. So, who would like to start? Miles?
Well, maybe we should dive into
Okay.
an issue that is near and dear to the hearts, I think, of very many Americans. And that is something that Bernie has been talking about, and that is the terrible divide between the rich and the poor in the country.
Right.
And, of course, I think we all understand the potential damage that can do. And this was certainly not something that the Founding Fathers had in mind. And when the country was first coming together, the country was really obviously an agrarian country. And the disparity in wealth hardly existed at first, because mostly, of course, people had small farms. And that agrarian culture persisted into the New Deal, when in the 20s, a quarter of Americans were still living on farms.
Right.
Yeah. And so there was, I would think, somewhat of a camaraderie among a large part of the population, because they generally had farms that were not terribly big. They were the family farms. But by the time of the end of the Depression, the number of people on farms had dropped considerably. And today, I think it's 10% of the population actually live on family farms, less than 10% even. And the disparity of wealth now has arisen because of the amassing of corporate wealth, stocks, and so on and so forth, and property that families have. And I can see it just in our family and friends, that it is at a point now where I know that the young people are inheriting money. And it's not like they're the Waltons inheriting $1 billion,
Right.
but they're inheriting millions of dollars. And when people inherit millions of dollars, they're not in the same game that everybody else is. In other words, their retirement is assured.
Right.
There isn't the prospect of loss of job
Right.
and income. They have this buffer. And I think what we're creating now is a divided culture in which there are people who are affluent enough that they don't really have skin in the game, as many other people do, where if they lose their job, they're in real trouble. And I think that that's a bad thing. When you have a country that is culturally so divided into people who really have and people who are just hanging on by their fingertips.
Right.
Yeah. And Bernie is very, very concerned with that.
Right.
Yeah.
He kind of recognizes that inequity, and he feels that for the sake of the country, the American people have to win their country back. They literally have to revolt.
Right.
And I'm not talking about an armed revolt. Revolt for Bernie Sanders means
A revolution.
it's a revolution of sorts.
Okay.
Now, he once spoke about the effectiveness of Barack Obama's campaign. So a lot of people behind him. He was able to beat Hillary Clinton and go on to win the election. But once he got in office, his attitude was, thank you for electing me, but I'll take it from here.
Right.
I'm going to be negotiating now with the Congress, and we're going to be able to get things done because I understand what it takes to work in government. And then he finally realized that they weren't working with him. They could care less about his agenda, and they simply wanted to get him out. Now, Bernie's aware of the fact that he could possibly run up against the same kind of belligerence from the Congress, but he is not going to say to the American people, listen, okay, thanks for putting me in, I'll take care of it. No, he's going to say, listen, we're all in this together. Okay? Right. You and I know why I was elected. You and I know what the needs of the American people are. Okay? When I confront the Congress on an issue, all right, I need you there. Right. I need you there demonstrating if need be.
Right.
I need you there expressing your will, so that the option of refusing the needs of the people or accepting the needs of the people are going to be, that option is going to be weighed in our favor, because we've got to win our country back if we haven't already lost it. And when he talks about our country being lost, he talks about our country being, our political system being owned by a large amount of money that happens to exist in the hands of the Wall Street conglomerate, large corporate concerns, some of which are operating offshore and evading taxes, and large insurance companies, all of which have very little interest in the needs of the American people.
Well, isn't there precedent for this back between the end of the 1800s and the beginning of the 1900s, where you had a very similar situation, where you had a very controlled wealth of the country by a very limited number of people that that we managed through hard work, we managed to overcome. Isn't there, so people don't feel like, what can I do? It won't make any difference because we've never been here before, and there's no way to escape this. Isn't there precedent for all this?
I think there is. Miles?
Well, I think that's a very good point, but I think that the technology that existed then was a buffer against the tyranny of really, really big money. Return the clock back to the period that you mentioned. The United States consisted of, to some extent, small towns, and in a small town you had almost a complete economy, right? If the folks didn't have automobiles, they had wagons, and it didn't take a huge corporation to make wagons. A few people could make a wagon if you have a blacksmith to make the steel rim for the wheels and the axle, and a few people who were good carpenters, you can make a wagon, and they can make a wagon in a small town. And so the small towns could even make their own plows. They could make their own clothing. They could grow their own food. And so, in a way, I believe that the small towns, which became so much of the culture of the United States, were largely independent and self-sufficient, and they were pure and wondrous.
Kind of like the farms.
Yeah,
You're saying
the farms
20%
and the
of the
small
population,
businesses,
yeah.
and then the folks who made things.
So they were independent, they were self-sufficient,
Yeah.
but somewhere along the line that all changed, and then there was something called division of labor.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
What's that? The division of labor.
well, I suspect that when life on the farms,
Right.
I think this is what China's going through now, became less of an option, less of a desirable option. People started filtering into the urban areas and into the cities and trying to make a better life for themselves in an urban environment. And then they were put in a situation where, in order to make a living, they had to go into manufacturing, or maybe into the professions.
Right.
And what happened was their talents and their skills were kind of streamlined. Someone was probably a very good teacher. Someone else was probably a very good machinist.
Right.
Someone else, what have you, a good lawyer, good
Right.
doctor.
Yeah. Right.
Okay, but a doctor would need a plumber.
Right.
Okay, a plumber might need an electrician.
Right.
An electrician might need a doctor.
Right.
They weren't as skilled in a variety of abilities, and they kind of depended on each other. And
So here that's a good point, about the dependence.
the
right?
dependency, yeah.
Yeah, I think in a small town, I think of the play by Thornton Wilder, Our Town.
Right, yes.
And there is this atmosphere in
Right.
which life is connected.
Yeah.
And I think that's what that play was largely about. The connection of life
Yeah.
and the fact that people could depend upon each other.
Yeah.
And then, as Joe points out, as the labor changed, what people did for a living changed, and the dependence between the blacksmith and the teacher and all in this relatively small town was largely lost. And in a way, the people became vulnerable to the vicissitudes of marketplaces. And I think that here in the United States, the pioneer and small town experience was so important to this culture that I think it's marvelously ingrained in us to a point where it's almost a fault.
It's a kind of rugged individualism.
Yeah.
That's basically what it boiled down to. And it led certain individuals that were extremely talented, people like Andrew Carnegie or Vanderbilt or some of these so-called captains of industry.
Right.
What they were able to do was, in a sense, corner a market.
Right.
And then they could build an incredible amount of wealth.
Which would have been the railroads or the lumber,
whatever,
barons,
oil.
Right, oil.
Rockefeller oil.
Right.
So all of a sudden, these barons were making out extremely well, but they relied on labor. There were no unions back then. They relied on labor, and capitalism is a wonderful form of government because it allows for a tremendous amount of innovation, creativity, and but it also fosters greed. You can look at greed in a negative sense if you want, but a lot of people don't do that. They just see it as a byproduct, a necessary prerequisite to acquiring more and more wealth. But by doing so, they exploit those workers that are contributing, to the amount of wealth that they're making, and they don't necessarily benefit as much.
Right.
But the system was such that the workers didn't necessarily envy or resent,
Right.
as long as the money was flowing back and forth and they could make a good living for themselves, and they tolerated the more affluent. There was an
Right.
inequity in society, but it was okay.
Especially with the immigrants coming.
Yeah, and then
right.
okay, and what happened was immigrants would flow in.
Right.
They would provide more work. Many times they were taking on jobs that earlier immigrants had economically
Right.
advanced from.
Right.
All right, because as time they become educated and they can
Exactly.
get more appealing positions in the society. But there came a time. There came a time when unions entered, and they helped create some balance between management and labor.
Right.
All right, but then what happened is we became kind of a different sort of economy. Steel at one time was the gauge of the health of our economy, the kind of steel we were producing. But eventually that became an offshore operation, and
Right.
people will be talking about the fluctuations in the stock market. All right, now there's no union that will help the individual investors in the stock market. There's the the large companies that are wheeling and dealing. There's the stock board. And they would manipulate the market so that they could further garner wealth and grow. And eventually what happened was the economy, despite going through a very serious recession, rebounded. And there was a large amount of money now fluctuating in the society, but it wasn't reaching the average American worker.
And this is after World War.
I'm talking about after 2008, 2009.
right,
I've really jumped ahead.
Right.
I mean, we could
yes.
talk about
Yeah.
the past and see how
Right,
this.
right,
But the fact of the
right,
matter is, I'm
it's
jumping
late.
ahead now
Yes.
because this is where we
Right,
are presently
exactly.
living. How we
Right.
got there is all well and good, and we could speculate on that.
Right.
But this is where we are now.
Right.
Okay, so when we look at the political landscape,
Right.
all right, we look at Republican, we look at Democrat, we look at socialist, we look at libertarian.
Right.
And we as American citizens have to say to ourselves, hey, let's get beyond that. Let's determine what the country really needs.
Yeah.
Now, you may listen to a number of politicians, and they may talk about this, and they may talk about that. But Bernie Sanders talks about what the average American citizen really wants from his or her government.
Right.
Even though they might not even realize that.
Right.
A lot of them don't even realize that. But that's the merit of Bernie Sanders right now.
Right.
He realizes that the money has been captured.
Right.
He realizes that the entire American system, all right, may have also been captured or bought. So that issues that the politicians may be talking about may appear to be a benefit to the people, but that might just be a spin. Because the real importance may be for the benefit of that higher upper economic echelon that is feeding the system all unto itself.
Interesting point, and I think we've seen in this election cycle two names that have stood out as far as being people that recognize the need for things changing, and one, of course, being Bernie Sanders and the other being Donald Trump. But I think what separates the two of them is that Donald Trump talks about we have serious problems. Bernie Sanders talks about, yeah, we have serious problems. here are the steps we can take in order to correct those problems.
Right.
And I think that separates him from Donald Trump in that respect. He has some pretty tangible solutions.
And Trump doesn't.
Well, I think you can question Trump's sincerity.
Right.
Bernie, he's always been an outsider. You know, he's a political outsider, and he is definitely a corporate outsider.
Right.
The corporate money has no interest in Bernie Sanders. He does nothing for them. All right, he is a serious distraction to them. He and his policies don't do them any favors. They do the average American a favor, but it doesn't affect them positively as they see it. So they'll do what they can to marginalize him, and the best way they can do it is with their money. With their money, all right, they can promote candidates. There's a tremendous amount of advertising that goes on, and unfortunately, this is a very unfortunate fact, but the American voter, the American citizen, in a democracy, it doesn't work. It does not work unless you have an enlightened electorate. They have to know what's going on.
Right.
And one way to deprive them of what's going on is by not telling them what's going on, but simply telling them what you want them to know.
Right.
People go and they're ready to vote, and who are you going to vote for? Are you going to vote for Hillary or Trump? Oh, yeah, Trump. Oh, yeah, Hillary. What about Bernie Sanders? Who's Bernie Sanders?
Right.
You follow? So they control it simply by publicizing it.
Right.
And they can pretty much have a hold on the media. And not only that, the media relies on ratings.
Of course.
Ratings are necessary to get advertising money.
Right.
All right.
Yes.
And
Yes,
in order
ratings.
to get ratings, you have to appeal to the to the interests of the people. Keeping in mind, a lot of them are not enlightened, so you're going
to the baser interest in a lot of cases.
There you go. So you hit them on Bernie's hair.
Right.
How Hillary is dressing.
Right. Well, they said
who Trump insulted.
Right.
All right.
Right. Who cares?
Start talking about Glass-Steagall. No, they don't want to know about Glass. They don't know.
You know, this. I was going to interrupt.
Go ahead.
This. This election is coming at a time that may not be terribly fortuitous for a socialist or a progressive candidate, because the business cycle has come out of a dreadful time. Turning the clock back 4 or 5 years, the unemployment rate was up at that point about 7.5–8%, and it had been
beginning
as high.
in 2009 when President Obama
it had been
10%. Hemorrhaging 800,000 jobs a month.
Exactly.
And that turned around with the stimulus package.
So if along came a Bernie Sanders at that time, I think people would have been properly receptive in the same sense that they were receptive during the Depression.
Right.
But when things are good, I think the mentality changes.
Right.
And unfortunately, people have maybe a short span of memory with that regard. And it could be that we're inherently mostly optimistic. And we feel, well, whatever happened, all these bad things, that was in the past. And from this point on, everything will come of roses.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think that this election, in a sense, is going to be influenced by a business cycle which is not dreadfully bad. It's some people feel is hanging on by its fingertips, but still employment is quite good. People are living well.
Right.
So I think that's an issue in terms of politics, how the economy is going at any given time.
Does the internet give candidates like Bernie Sanders a bit of a leg up, not just with young people, it seems, but in everybody, because you want to know about a candidate's positions on the issue. You can go to BernieSanders.com, HillaryClinton.com, Donald Trump, Ben Carson. You can go to all these candidates, and you can at least get their take on what needs to be done to move forward, to move America into a better place.
Well, there seems to be a consensus on whether or not someone like Bernie Sanders can actually find himself in the White House. And there's a lot of things about him that are really strong. I mean, the turnout of people, the interest in his take. But he's got one big hill to climb, and that is the PAC money. You know, the money. He doesn't have those. $2 billion will be kicking into Hillary's campaign soon.
Right.
From big money, and Bernie doesn't have that.
Right.
So it's an uphill climb, but it's not impossible.
Right.
It's not impossible.
Is he maybe getting there more bang for the buck from his internet reaching out to people, more effectiveness in that than in television advertising, where a lot of people don't even watch television anymore.
Thus far, he actually has collected more money than any of the Republicans.
Not only that,
and he hasn't spent very much either.
No, he did spend money. He's got a new ad out.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which I checked, and I like it. I find it very intelligent, very appealing, right to the point.
Tell me about it.
Starts off, you know how these ads are. They're short because of the attention span of the American people.
Right, of course.
But Polish immigrant, rising to the streets.
The point that I was, that I was really talking about before, and I hope not belaboring it, is that there is a pendulum in the economy.
Right.
It swings back and forth.
What experience
And when times are bad,
right.
I think at that time this American notion about being self-sufficient and all is viewed differently than when things are bad. When things are good, everybody is John Wayne.
Right.
When things are bad, everybody is Henry Fonda.
Grapes of Wrath.
And the Grapes of Wrath.
Right.
Yeah. And I think that's it's unfortunate that there isn't more consistency. Right? And I think that's a big issue, because I fear very much that the pendulum swings in the future are going to get worse rather than better. I mean, we have Janet Yellen doing whatever she can to keep things stable, but there are people who say that so much money has been printed that we are headed for a disaster sooner or later. And when that happens, it could be that what happened in 2008 and 9 will seem like a walk in the park. Things could get very, very bad, and the pendulum will swing very, very far. Right?
Well, maybe things have to get that bad for there to be a revolution.
People say,
right.
For there to be, I don't think you're talking about a shooting revolution, but somewhat of a radicalization of American politics, such as happened back in the 30s.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, politicians are not really afraid of the shooting revolution. The French are, because they've had that.
Well, Smith and Wesson is not afraid of that.
No, that would be
good times for them, huh?
Right.
Yeah, very good times.
Talking a highly hypothetical case here, but that whole John Wayne Henry Fonda image is kind of interesting, because you can't have too much John Wayne, because it's unrealistic, and you can't have too much Henry Fonda either. It's just when you have, if you equate John Wayne with pure capitalism, if you equate Henry Fonda with the need for some social programs, you've got to have those social programs in effect for the benefit of the people, especially when the economy is doing well. There's a good deal of affluence on the top, and the need for a greater safety net is necessary. So, but what I would like to mention, we haven't touched upon Bernie Williams Bernie Williams. There I go again.
There you go,
Ball,
Bernie
that's
Williams,
the ball
yeah.
player.
He plays the guitar.
He
Nice,
plays the guitar,
very
plays the
good.
guitar
Yeah.
now, and
Yes.
I guess it's the fact that the Mets went under so quickly that that baseball is still on my mind. I mean,
And the cat predicted
It shouldn't be because you're a Mets fan.
yeah, I know.
You
I
should
know.
get
They lost. The Mets lost.
get over it.
They did. I'm going to do my best because there's always next year.
Here's a good simplification for you.
No, we really went off on a tangent.
Here's a good simplification for you. Now, the other show that I'm a co-host on, Basil Buddha Cat Presents! Exclamation
Yeah.
point. Basil predicted that Kansas City would win the World Series. And why would Kansas City win the World Series? Because Kansas City happens to have the letters C, A, T, and S in it, whereas obviously New York does not.
Right. And
So that's why Kansas City. Why not?
cat wisdom for you.
Cat wisdom. Yep.
So what was the subject you wanted to touch
Well, I want to
upon?
touch upon Bernie Sanders, his foreign policy. I like to kind of bring that to the attention of people because too much is said about ISIS and Syria, Iran, and people are thinking about the necessity for us to get involved in that mire, which it really is. I mean, I feel badly for how the individual citizens are being displaced and the horrible situation as it is. But it's an Islamic problem. These are Islamic countries.
It's a local issue for the
Basically,
most part. Yeah.
it's a local issue. We really should stay out of that.
Right.
All right, we really should stay out. Now, you got Iran. That's a powerful country. You got Saudi Arabia. That's a powerful country.
Yeah.
Okay, these two countries, okay, are at war.
Right.
There's a proxy war going on. Iran represents the Shiites, and so Saudi Arabia represents the Sunnis. Now, why is all this insanity going on?
Right.
I'll tell you why. Because at the end of World War I, when the English and the French and the Russians decided to carve up the whole area,
Oh, wow.
they didn't carve it up with any interest of who lives there. They carved it up. Their interest was the natural resources, the oil, and whatever, how else they could benefit. So they had these countries, they had this area under colonization. And then finally, okay, they moved out. These people learned from them that we can sustain some power for ourselves with a strong man. A strong man that can keep these the religious differences and the ethnic differences under control, one way or another. And most of the time, it might be they might be able to do it brutally.
Is Sunni and Shia maybe the Eastern world's equivalent of the Western world's Catholic and Protestant?
Absolutely, we had to go through it, and there was no powers that interfered with it. We had to kill each other for about 100 years before somebody said, "Oh, now we got to stop this."
Right.
Okay, now they were prevented from killing each other because they were under the oppressed colonization of Europe.
Right.
Europe pulls out; they're under the oppressed control of the strong man, Hafez al-Assad. This goes back before the guy that's there now, Bashir, his father, Saddam Hussein. Okay, in Iraq. All right.
The Ayatollah in Iran.
Yeah, and we interfered with that, and we contributed to that. So what happens is there's something called the Arab Spring. Everybody figures, oh, well, now that it's all breaking up, we're going to have democracy. Well, we thought that when we went into Iraq. Oh, we're going to liberate Iraq and we're going to put up a democracy. Well, as I said before, democracy depends on an enlightened electorate. In Egypt, if 20 million people are educated and 80 million people only know the Quran, who's going to get elected? Let's face it. All right,
Right.
it's just you cannot have democracy just based on elections. You have to have an electorate that responds to it, and that's not easy. I mean, we're barely making it with our electorate here. But the point that I'm trying to make is that the Shiites and the Sunnis, you got the Shiites in Iran, okay? You got a Shiite control in Syria. So Iran and Syria, they're working together to keep the Sunnis under control. In Iraq, you had Sunnis, you had a large population of Shiites. The Sunnis under Saddam Hussein were oppressing the Shiites. We went in there, looked around, saw that there was a majority of Shiites, and so somehow or other we left them with a Shiite government. The Shiite government was marginalizing the Sunnis that were there. So the Sunnis in the north all of a sudden grew in power when they got together to oppose the Shiites in Syria, and they realized, hey, we're ISIS now. We're going to set up our own country. Meanwhile, the Kurds, all right, they don't want to be oppressed by the Sunnis or the Shiites, so they're trying to maintain a little piece of the property. All right, but they're not on good spirits with the Turks. Mm-hmm. So, this whole thing gets very, very complicated, extremely complicated. All right, another thing, too, is ISIS, they're so barbaric. They cut people's heads off. What do? We electrocute them. We used to hang them. Sometimes we shoot them. I mean,
there's enough barbarism to go around for pretty much every culture.
There's insanity all over.
Yeah.
Wow.
That insanity we do not need to be a part of.
No.
We need to leave that alone and let them work it out. And they can work it out. The Saudis are so smart.
Right.
You know how much oil they sold us, and you know what they bought? They bought armaments. A tremendous amount of armaments. They've got the military capability of handling that situation. They're not going to bother ISIS right now. ISIS is Sunni. That whole wasabi mentality had its roots in Saudi Arabia. You follow? So they're not going to go in there. They went into Yemen because Yemen is right next door, and Shiites managed to get control of the government. Boom! They took care of that right away. All right, now here we are siding with the Sunnis in Saudi Arabia because we've done that since Eisenhower's time, and at the same time trying to negotiate an agreement with Iran to prevent them from getting nuclear power, nuclear weapons. These Islamic countries, Sunni and Shiite, looking at us and saying, wow, now that they stepped in, how can we manipulate them? Even the Russians, I can't believe the stupidity on Putin's part. He thinks he's so wise. He goes into Syria. You think he would have learned from Afghanistan? No, he goes into Syria now. As far as I'm concerned, he's stepped in you know what, and he's going to realize it after a while.
Camel stuff.
You bet.
Yeah.
I think our best bet is to really step away from that.
Right.
And Bernie Sanders, he knows this. He's aware of this.
Right.
As far as he's concerned, we don't put boots on the ground, okay, unless it's a question of our own defense.
Right.
We should have learned way back during the American Revolution.
Right.
The British were at a terrible disadvantage.
Right.
They went into the United States.
Right.
They went, it wasn't the United States then. It went into the colonies.
Yeah.
Right.
It attempted to reassert its authority, and it was dealt with by guerrilla warfare. And listen, those red coats, they were easy targets.
Yeah.
I mean, come on.
That's for sure.
So here we go into an area that we're not familiar with, and we are culturally ignorant of their customs.
Exactly.
They're so easy to violate. And once you start violating the cultural customs and you start inadvertently stepping on people's toes,
right.
they want you out.
Exactly.
They want you out. So his position is pretty much no unilateral operation.
Right.
Support on occasion depending, but the Saudis and the Iranians, they have to work all that stuff out for themselves. The Turks, they have to work themselves out. They have to deal with ISIS. They have to deal with Syria.
They're the policemen of the region.
That's their region. That's their problem. I mean, we don't even need the resources there anymore. So even from a selfish point of view, we don't need to be bothered with that. We could assist with humanitarian assistance, and that's what our military should be doing. We should be doing humanitarian assistance around the world.
That's where you win people's hearts, is helping them out through the use of through food and medicine and things of that nature, rather than shooting at them.
That's how you win over the people, and you don't have to. There's a lot of, and lives don't have to necessarily be lost. That's Bernie and his far. And then the climate change. Climate change is another one.
Of course, we've got Marty here in the studio with us, not with us, but out there doing something else. And I asked him about this. There's a big thing that just came out about Exxon. Now, Exxon, back in the day before ExxonMobil, before they merged, Exxon, going as far back as 1981, apparently understood that climate change was in process, that there was such a thing, that it was caused by greenhouse gases, caused by fossil fuels.
Yes, I had read that in '77, Exxon had done a study.
Yeah.
And they said that there's no question about it. That global warming is being caused by CO2 being liberated into the atmosphere. Yeah, back in '77, even earlier than...
It shouldn't be a surprise to us. Look at it. I mean, how many roads are there in the world? How many cars are on those roads? How much fossil fuel is being burned? If you have a perimeter, an area, just create any size perimeter. Take the size of this room. What's the size of this room? You have any idea? What is it? Just give me a...
To the restaurant.
You want it in cubic centimeters?
No, cubic.
40 by 25. About 1,000 square feet.
Yeah, about 1,000 square. So we got a perimeter of 1,000 square feet, all right? And a certain animal comes into that area and decides to defecate and urinate. All right? If that animal comes in 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 times, the area can handle it, okay? But if this is constant... It's constant. If all of a sudden this area becomes totally putrefied, what's going to happen? You're going to have bacteria. You're going to have viruses. Okay, nature is going to want to solve this problem and put an end to the creatures that are coming in here, creating the defilement, because nature seeks balance.
So our environment has the capacity to handle a certain amount of problem issues of this nature, but to get beyond that, and it becomes more problematic and less more difficult for nature to absorb these things.
And rather than absorb it, nature will find a way to eliminate the problem, one way or another. Okay?
Really, it comes down to the first cut it is population. Right?
Well,
and the world population has been growing very, very rapidly over the last 50 to 100 years.
We've seen plagues in the history of the world.
And then, in a way, sometimes we Americans are a little bit at fault because we don't recognize how difficult the lives are of some of the third world countries. And China, for example, is polluting a lot. And I know for a fact that Japan had been. I was in Japan on a business trip maybe about 20 years ago. I found myself in Yokohama, and I couldn't breathe the air. It was so bad. It was unbelievably bad.
Wow.
But what they have had to do was to provide for massive populations. And in the process, of course, the environment was set aside. The Chinese people have really destroyed the beauty, for example, of the Yangtze River. This gorgeous river with rapids and whatnot, and there were even dolphins that lived in the river, and there's hardly anything alive in that river anymore.
So we saw that with Lake Erie on our border with Canada, Lake Erie, which was in horrible condition in the 70s. And you do things in order to accommodate the environment to clean itself up, and it does.
Yeah.
It will.
But it does take time, it does take effort, it does take cutting back on, in our case now, fossil fuel consumption.
Yeah. So there is, in a sense, you're saying there is this maturation, right, of cultures all over the world. And they're coming to that point, I think,
Well, here's the
where
thing.
they realize now that they cannot throw the environment to the four winds anymore, literally and figuratively, but rather they have to rein it in. And I think that there's progress being made in that. And the recognition is coming forth.
Yeah, there are solutions to these things, but we have to act in a timely fashion in order to accommodate those solutions to allow our planet to take care of itself. I'm consider myself a devout Christian, and I understand that especially the younger kids, the evangelicals, they recognize that we're stewards of the land. It's our job to take care of our planet, and it's important that we do that. And
David, the fact of the matter is, you know, if we don't take care of the planet will take care of us.
Right.
In a negative sense.
Because, you know, there is such a thing as population control. And we've limited the planet's ability to maintain population control because we have medicines, we have technology, we're able to deal with famine, we're able to deal with drought, we can put controls on war, we can control the environment in such a way that our population can flourish. But once that population starts to flourish, it's going to utilize certain resources. And if it utilizes those resources beyond a particular threshold, well, the planet will naturally try to offset what's going on. You got all that carbon in the air, situation's going to arise, climate's going to change, because the planet needs to control an avarice population which is attempting to do damage to it. It's in constant flux. I mean, the Earth spins around, it rotates, and it revolves around the sun like the other planets do. But then the entire solar system is moving toward the constellation Hercules, and then probably the entire Milky Way. All right, so everything is moving. Everything is changing. It's not static. So when you create an imbalance, that imbalance has to be corrected, and it might be at the expense of the human population. Floods, weird typhoons, hurricanes.
That's an important point. Balance. I think that might be the word that sums up the need that we have to return that balance, tip that balance back in favor of the environment.
I don't think there, forgive me, but I don't think there ever was a balance. It's just that the population was lower and the technology was primitive, relatively. And now, with a huge population and technologies that are capable of pouring out enormous amounts of CO2, the thing has changed. The game has changed.
It accelerated.
Yeah, it did. And a worrisome thing is that there's a term that people use in the analysis of systems, and it has to do with something called positive feedback. And if you have a control system, you don't want positive feedback, you want negative feedback, because what happens with negative feedback is that you can keep the system under control. But if you have positive feedback and any growth in the system is fed back into the system, the growth actually pushes it further, and then you get a little bit more growth, and that's fed back in, and the system goes completely out of control. All right? And the worry is that we're approaching a point where positive feedback will take over. And a specific example of this, for example, is the polar ice caps. Mm-hmm. And if you start to melt them, what happens is the melting of those ice caps contributes to the global warming, because you don't have this mass of snow and ice, which is highly reflective, right?
The two things, being reflective at the same time, that's where a lot of the concentration of carbon dioxide in the world is.
Right.
And that's released.
Right.
Like not only from the ice caps, but also from the huge amount of calcium. White Cliffs of Dover, as an example. These are areas that these contain huge amounts. They've captured a lot of carbon dioxide.
So you say it's going to be released.
It's being released, and that's part of it. You don't have the reflective powers of the ice caps throwing heat back into space.
Right. So this is we live in this hothouse, right? And the sun, its energy comes down into this, and we want to reflect it back out.
The planet grabs what it needs and reflects the rest of it back out.
And not only the CO2 is having an adverse effect upon that, but also the shrinkage of the solar ice caps. So things can get things can get out of hand, and you have positive feedback. And the worrisome thing is that if that happens, all sorts of reining in of the production of CO2 by means of, who knows, electric cars, more efficient automobiles, the use, God forbid, of nuclear power and solar power and wind power, not producing carbon dioxide, it will be too little and too late. So that's the worry.
It may very well be too little and too late.
Interesting advertisement, and this, you see sponsored by things all across the media, but an ad couched as made to look like an informative thing by the nuclear power industry, that 62%, I think it was 62% of the non-carbon, not fossil fuel, 62% of that is taken care of by nuclear energy. But the flip side of that is that 38% is not. It's things that we're looking for, the renewable resources that don't have the damaging potential of nuclear energy. And with that, we're going to have to wrap it up. Co-host, guests, and Progressive Soup. You want to wrap it up?
Sure, thanks. Thanks for joining us for our discussion today. We have Miles Gansfried. Did I say that right?
Close enough.
Okay, Miles Gansfried. Yes, and then we had Joe Niola. And we talked about, our discussion was starting out to talk about Bernie Sanders as a Democrat, and then we talked about so many issues today.
And we're out on YouTube anyway.
Yeah,
YouTube,
so thanks for
Facebook,
joining us.
And
Emily Lofton-Hassa, David Stevenson.
Yep.
And we'll see you next time.
Good night.
Good night. Wow, that went by really quickly.
I'm going to shut it off real fast.
I didn't finish my soup.
Strenuous stuff.
Oh, no.
That was good.
You think so?
I think so.
It's interesting. So I was talking about our revolution. I was watching this. Have you seen the Seinfeld? He does driving in cars for drinking coffee, right?
I saw it. He was driving the Saab.
And he was interviewing this comedian from South Africa, and he grew up with apartheid, and he's saying that unless you grow up with being with attack dogs and police dogs, and things they revolt against. But he says maybe Americans we're too, I don't know, what's the word? We're
Insulated,
or he says young people we revolt against things via the internet, like we sign petitions online, like we're not out there revolting. What do you think it would take people in this country to revolt and get out there? And do you think people are too...
Well, I think we were touching on that, weren't
we?
Emily, we were saying when the pendulum swings and things get bad enough.
So bad.
Yeah, we won't have a revolution, I don't think.
Right.
But people will tend to be more open-minded to socialist government or progressive.
Well, we did have our fill of the Vietnam War. Too many people were coming home in body bags.
Right.
And this was during the draft when it was affecting everybody, not just a small segment that nobody could care about. And there were marches on Washington, and congressmen were looking out the windows, and they were getting kind of nervous.
Right.
And they realized, all right, this thing's got to end.
Right. That's what Johnson
one
brought.
way or another. It's at one time it's like